We're going to try something different today. We're going live. I hope that this works. It seemed to work in my first class. You could actually log on and you could go live. I'm going to monitor it from my phone, so you could give me a little thumbs up. You can also, we're going to go to Minty today. There will be two critical thinking challenges, one of which you'll have to figure out some math. And so here is the word problem that we're going to have to do. And that'll be towards the end of class today. We're going to do a nice word problem and see how many of you can remember basic algebra, how to set up a formula to solve for X. I'll never forget, I have a book called Really Stupid Answers That Teachers Get or something, and there's one, the student turned in a test, it said solve for X, and the student circled, here it is, circled the X and put here it is. So we're going to talk about advertising and promotion, organizing for advertising and promotion. So you can go to Minty. We'll vote on Minty for the second critical thinking challenge today. The first one I'm going to read to you, and then what I'm going to do is we'll probably end a little bit early today, and I'll give you some time at the end of class to come up with this. There should be a Dropbox, I believe, on D2L that I've created for this critical thinking challenge. And so what the challenge is to answer this question. In the postmodern, post-industrial, highly digitalized world, can advertising agencies survive? So your text starts with sort of a nice vignette that I'm sure that you didn't read, because studies show us that you actually don't read anything that's in those special boxes in the textbook. What you generally tend to do is you go through and you look at the key terms and you try to memorize those key terms, and you don't actually integrate any of the rest of it. So they talk about Mad Men, which I've talked about in here before, and that's one of the reasons that I like the vignette, which was sort of the golden age of advertising. And they based that off of a real advertising agency that existed in Chicago. And the idea is that that's all radically changed in the last even 5 years. I can show you a video on how much digital has impacted marketing. And the video itself, it's a TED Talk by Alessandro Acquisti, and it's already out of date. It's not that old, but the TED Talk itself is actually out of date because it talks about a number of technologies that are gone. I asked my students, for example, one year, and it hadn't been very long, about whether or not they were on Vine, and they're like, "Oh, no." And I was like, "Well, why aren't you on Vine?" They're like, "It's gone. Like, mine is gone." So you should have a thesis. You should support it with 3 substantive examples, and then develop a well-rounded conclusion about whether or not advertising agencies are going to survive, or if it's going to radically change in this world in which we can go live. We can do our own promotional stuff by using YouTube and Facebook and Twitch. Lots of people are getting followers on these platforms. For example, I like to paint. I paint in oil, and so I watched, the way I got interested in painting was my mother owned an art gallery, and about a year ago I just decided, well, maybe I should try this. I've collected art. If you go over to my office in Thatcher Hall, I know that's the Sahara Desert across that parking lot over there, and it's on the 3rd floor. I have a beautiful office that overlooks the lake with a lot of fine oil paintings that came from Santa Fe, New Mexico, in my mother's art gallery. And I thought, well, maybe I could do this. So I got on YouTube and found some people that were giving free lessons on how to paint various things using oil. And then one of them said, I am painting live on Twitch. And so I started watching his feeds live on Twitch every day to see if I could get some tips and tricks on how to paint different things that I'm interested in. I like mostly to paint landscapes. And so these are all ways that we can promote ourselves, and it's easy to do, and you don't necessarily need specialized people. And in fact, a lot of the specialized agencies are behind the time because they're still doing in an old model, storyboards and stuff like that. Whereas one of the guys that I brought up Vine in one of my classes, because there's a guy, and his last name is Paul. I can't think of his first name.
Oh, Logan Paul.
Yeah, Logan Paul. He started on Vine, and he basically built a book of business with companies that pay him to do these short little sketches to promote their video. And his biggest thing that he did when he started on Vine, Logan Paul, was what? Anybody know? Since you know who he is, what did he do?
Was it the Coca-Cola one?
No, what did he become famous for?
Pranks or something.
Doing what?
There was pranks and stuff.
Yeah, but what kind of pranks specifically? He did the splits in all kinds of different places. He can like, he's amazing doing this. Yeah, that's how he started. Shooting these videos, doing the splits. That's how he started. He was doing these great, like he did the splits on the Great Wall of China.
Yeah.
And so it's, incredible that people are developing this kind of content and are becoming popular, and companies are actually using this. So can these agencies survive? Again, go to Minty and you can, I see I've got one cat that's already been thrown at me. So
Got another one coming your way.
So your text gives you this, and I'm not sure I like this diagram of the participants in the IMC process. And it starts out with the ad agency the advertiser on the left, and then the ad agency, the media organizations. And I'm not sure that this is actually, if you drew a diagram of how it's organized, I have a tendency to think that you should organize things in a sort of hierarchical model if you're talking about org charts. So you should start with the advertiser at the top, and then these other things off of it. And perhaps the ad agency, you would have, in some instances, if it's a full service agency, collateral services actually under that, because they're contracting with these other entities for those kinds of services. So it sort of depends, but this is the participants in the IMC process according to your text, and they're incredibly bad diagram in my opinion, because it should be pyramidal and hierarchical in nature to demonstrate that what's the primary person in the integrated marketing communication process? Well, the primary person is going to be the company that hires and needs the promotional materials developed and engages in integrated marketing communication.
So
Would that be the what?
the client.
The client, yeah. I think the client should be at the top, and then you should have the ad agency, and then media specialists or marketing communications that they have, and then collateral services under that. And then, of course, you could fill in those boxes. You could go down the pyramid with the various sorts of departments and players that participate in that process. But nonetheless, that's the pathetic image the authors of the textbook give you. I hope they're watching my live feed and taking notes on how they can engage in better integrated marketing communication with their audience, which is me.
But millennials don't like hierarchy, they like.
Right, yes,
Yeah,
that's
like
true.
horizontal
You do like, but it's, we're still organized for the most part in a hierarchical type of thing, a hierarchical type scheme. So there are different types of systems. You can have a centralized system in the organization itself. And if you have a small to mid-sized company, this is what you have, where you have an advertising manager that is responsible for all of the promotional activities except sales. And of course, when we say these things, there are of course always exceptions to the rule, because in the company that I worked for, we had an executive vice president. So I was the executive vice president of administration and legal. So I was the chief legal officer for the company that I worked for. And then we had an executive vice president of sales and marketing who did all of these things under him. And he had regional vice presidents of sales and marketing under that. And then those people had various people that worked for them, communication specialists that promoted our product. So the advertising manager is responsible for all activities of sales. They do budgeting, coordinating, creation and production of the IMC program, planning media schedules, when you're going to release things, what media you're going to buy in,
So
monitoring. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Why aren't they over sales there?
In our organization, the text tells you that they're not, but in some organizations, obviously businesses can structure themselves however they want. Historically, marketing has been split from sales, and I don't know why that is in a lot of companies. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that I think it's bad to do that is because marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. And if you do that and you split it, you view marketing as a cost center and not a profit center, and it should be a profit center, in my opinion. And so if you have a VP of sales and marketing,
I worked for
a chief
boss-
marketing officer,
Yeah, I worked for a
role.
boss who separated those. He thought marketing was separated from sales. They're not the same thing. But what you just said.
no, I mean, marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. Marketing seeks to create value across the firm. And so you have to integrate it. So sales is a part of marketing. And I think if you have a chief marketing officer, which is becoming more and more prevalent, and that person really, what historically, in my opinion, the second in command in many organizations to the chief executive officer has been the CFO. And that makes no sense because finance people don't bring money in generally unless you're doing IPOs, but that's not sustainable. You can't just continue to do public offerings. You have to have something that you're actually selling in order to generate revenue, and that's marketing and sales. And so I think that really, and I think a more modern model will be, and I think you will see emerging trends towards the CMO being sort of the second in command at many companies and agencies. Then you can have a decentralized system. Where do you have decentralized systems? Well, for example, my sister, before she went to work for Boeing as vice president of sales and marketing, she worked for L3. L3 is a broad defense contractor, broad company that offers services primarily in the defense contracting field. And under L3 was the company that she was actually the president for, which was called L3 Integrated Systems. And what they did was they integrated certain types of communication systems. Primarily, their biggest contract was with the military to do integrated systems on the Boeing C-130, to modify the C-130 to be a command vehicle that would be capable of staying up for long periods of time and having the communications necessary. So as the president of L3 Integrated Systems, which was a strategic business unit of L3, it was a decentralized system. She had people that were in charge when she was president of L3 Integrated Systems that were in charge of marketing and sales for integrated systems, and then L3 Communication had other people, and then there were other parts of L3. L3 contracts a lot with, and they provide a lot of contractual services for the FAA, for example, and that was a whole different division, and so that's a decentralized system in which each strategic business unit has its own brand manager who generally works with outside agencies to promote the organization's overall goods. And so if you think about companies like Johnson & Johnson, Johnson & Johnson has multiple types of strategic business units, from pharmaceutical to devices. And so those device companies often will have their own brand manager. You'll have a decentralized system. The advantage in large organizations of having a decentralized system is that, for example, generally speaking, people in L3 Integrated Systems didn't know what was going on because they dealt with the military and not the civilian side of government contracting, which is the FAA. And that's a completely different set of rules that go along with government contracting. And the people in the FAA department didn't need to know what was going on. And so then you have at the corporate umbrella level, somebody who sort of monitors all of that, makes sure that each of the units is performing the way they should. But you have a lot of ability to, if you have those strategic business units, to have more flexibility and be more nimble than if you have it all going through a big bureaucracy, which is one of the reasons, as you pointed out, that millennials don't like bureaucracy. We generally have a tendency to think of bureaucracy as a bad word. And I ask students in classes like this, when I say the word bureaucracy and hierarchy, what do you think of?
FBI.
You think of the FBI? What do you think of the FBI?
Because of bureaucracy of government.
It's a standard bureaucratic, and they have power, and you want to avoid them. You probably don't want to have any interactions with the FBI. My stepfather, I think I told you all, which was the man who raised me, was a special agent in charge in the FBI for the field office in New Mexico, and so fairly high up, but it's a government agency that you don't want to interact with. If you do, it's generally negative, and that can have consequences that may turn out poorly for you, which is why if the FBI agent is talking to you, these people don't learn. What did Martha Stewart go to jail for? This is just a tangent and an aside.
Is embezzlement
She did not go to jail for insider trading. They could not prove insider trading. What they could prove was that she what?
Evaded taxes.
No, they couldn't prove that either. She lied to an FBI agent. She went to jail for lying to an FBI agent. So don't do that. When the man with the badge is talking to you, you start out with one thing. Am I free to go? And if you're free to go, you should go. If you're not free to go, at that point, you have, for all intents and purposes for Fourth Amendment procedure, been seized, and you should say, I want my lawyer. That's the next thing that should come out of your mouth, is I want my lawyer, if you're not free to go. And the reason I point this out is because these bureaucratic organizations, with regard to businesses oftentimes take on a bureaucracy in and of themselves, although we tend to think of the bureaucracy as being the public sector. Private sectors can have bureaucratic type structures as well, where they become enormously entrenched, and it's very difficult to get them to engage or move off high center. And if the market changes out from under you, you may lose an entire opportunity because you're not able to deal with it. And you have this highly centralized system that maintains control over everything. All right, there we go. In-house agencies, a lot of companies are actually going to in-house agencies. Now, what we can say is that historically speaking, companies have outsourced their marketing or their advertising and promotion to outside agencies. What you assume when you outsource, anytime you outsource, you are assuming what? What is the a priori assumption if you are outsourcing to somebody else to do the job?
Yeah, do it.
Well, you don't have to do it, but what are you assuming by outsourcing?
They can do it better.
They can do it better. That is absolutely it. I would say that you are assuming that you're inefficient at doing that activity. You are not efficient. And if you think about this, that would be true for most organizations. Ford is really good at what? What is Ford really good at? What's Ford's competitive advantage in the market?
They can roll F-150 out every 15 seconds.
They can roll an F-150 out, and why can they do that? What's their real competitive advantage? What is Ford doing now? What's the latest?
They're cutting all their car models except for the.
They are doing away with all of their car models except for one, which is the Mustang. Ford is doing away. Why is that?
Because all their profit mostly comes from trucks.
They have recognized, now this may be a bad decision if gas prices go back up to $5 a gallon for Ford. This may not be the play that they want to do, but because they have started building the F-150 out of aluminum, and they've got the turbo boost and the eco boost, which is a turbocharged engine, and they've got the hybrid, the flex fuel model, they have become far more fuel efficient than trucks in the past. But again, if gas prices reach $5 a gallon, and they may, again, at some point, I think it's going to be very short-sighted to not have some car models, particularly hybrids, that are very popular. But Ford, their biggest profit and their number one selling vehicle has been the Ford F-150. That is the number one selling truck in America year after year after year. And so that's their competitive advantage. They have outsourced, for the most part, by and large, for most of their history, they've outsourced a lot of their advertising and promotion. And why is that? Because Ford is good at doing what? They are good at building cars and trucks, and mostly trucks. That's their real competitive advantage. So they're not experts in the field of advertising and stuff like that. And so big companies often outsource that. But you are assuming when you outsource any function of your firm that you are inefficient at doing that. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That may just be a recognition of the fact that if you're in the business of doing X, building cars and trucks, you're not in the business of producing great commercials. But there are some companies that are bringing it in-house, and they've set up their own agencies to basically control and maintain their IMC programs. And they combine that usually with some external agencies, because most of them don't have things like production studios and stuff like that, although I suppose you could have big enough organizations that do have those kinds of abilities to do that. But what's the advantage? You maintain control. You have your own people in there. You can monitor it more closely in theory. What's the disadvantage to having an in-house agency? What would be a big disadvantage to having an in-house agency? Can be costly. That can be a big disadvantage. Although if you're saving money, because again, you're assuming that you're inefficient, and I'm not sure that you can't hire people, because what they're going to do is they're going to pay somebody a salary. If you say, well, you're paying this person a salary to come up with storylines, I could pay them the salary and avoid the overhead charge that you're going to bill me. You might be able to do it more efficiently, particularly if you're a company like Ford that has such a huge network of resources. To do that, you could, in theory, do it. What maybe is a bigger disadvantage is you engage in groupthink, and you don't have an outside perspective. And sometimes that's worth having. It's having somebody outside say, really? What are you thinking? No, that's not a good idea. So, ad agencies. Ad agencies are agencies that provide service to an organization in planning and executing programs for their clients. There are more than, now one of the things that's happened, when I first started teaching marketing years and years and years ago, before we had really developed our sales program here at UCO, and that decided that was going to be the focus of our department. So if you look at marketing departments throughout the country, they have a tendency to sort of specialize in an area. Our department has chosen to focus most of its energy on sales. If you go down to OU, they think, although they're not anymore, but they think that they're a logistics school. I'm not sure that that's true. They don't seem to have any logistics scholars that are publishing. They've lost a lot of them, but they were a logistics school. And so their focus was on logistics and transportation, the place part of marketing. We have chosen in our department to really focus our specialty on professional sales. That's not to say that we don't offer, we don't support a variety of other courses and offerings like this one, Integrated Marketing Communication, but we really focus on sales. Before we decided that was our focus, I would ask students, what do you want to do? And a lot of them would say, well, I want to go to work for an advertising agency. I will tell you that those jobs are hard to get. One of the things you should think about is going to sales, because you're going to have an easier time getting a job. They're hard to get, and they tend to be concentrated in places like New York City. So there are 10,000 agencies in the United States, but of that 10, so that sounds like a lot, and you can find advertising agencies in Oklahoma City, but 2/3 of the billing for all of the agencies in the United States are handled by the top 500 firms. And this is sort of one of those rules of the universe that seems to hold true, which is that 20%, and this is true in sales as well, 20% of your sales force is probably going to do 80% of your sales volume. And 80% are going to be 20. And you want to be in which part? Well, you want to be in the top 20%. So 2/3 of the billing is handled by the top 500 firms. 10 U.S. agencies alone account for 30% of the revenue done in the United States. And they are geographically concentrated, with the top 10 all having headquarters where. So if you want to go into integrated marketing communication and you really want to be successful at this, unlike sales, where you can stay right here in God-given Oklahoma and get a good job, you're probably going to have to go to commie, liberal, tree-hugging, bunny-thumping, Hillary Clinton voting, New York City.
Arkansas.
Well, I thought it was New York City, and then you kept going on.
She's the senator. She was the senator from New York.
Oh, that's true.
And she lived right outside, or she moved, conveniently enough, at the end of President Clinton's term, right outside to Chappaqua, New York, which is on the edge of New York City. In the 1980s and 1990s, we saw a great deal of agency consolidation in this field. And so we now have what are called the super agencies that tend to dominate the field. Again, it's not that we don't have advertising and promotion agencies here, in Oklahoma City. It's just that we don't have a big concentration of them. It's harder to get jobs where, for every job that students want when they come talk to me about getting a job in advertising, I've got like 15 jobs in sales, just to give you an idea. Of course, I shamelessly plug the sales program here at UCM because I teach sales more than anything else. So it's what I like. We have a tendency to like what we do best, right? So what's the ad agency's roles? Well, they provide clients, and this is again where most people are not specialists. They don't know how to hire the right kind of artists, writers, media analysts, researchers that can help the client develop an overall IMC plan, an integrated marketing communication plan. Having an outside agency, as I said before, can also provide you with an objective viewpoint of the market. Generally speaking, businesses tend to be more objective than government agencies because government agencies respond to constituents that gain effective access to them. How do you do that? Well, you lobby, and that's going to be important, by the way, in talking about IMC, but governments tend to not necessarily. Why is it that we are building buildings on this campus in spite of the fact that what's happening in the area of education, broadly speaking?
Getting defunded, but
It's what?
our
Well, higher education is declining. Why is that? Why are our numbers declining? The cost is expensive.
yeah,
People aren't necessarily seeing the value.
5% tuition is 5% every semester.
Tuition is going up. But what else is happening? I mean, I don't know why. I look across campus, and it's beautiful. I will tell you, when I first started here years ago, I have taught here at UCO since I was 22 years old. I'm 45. This is my 23rd year here at the Harvard of the Hills, the Berkeley of the Blackjacks, the Princeton of the Plains, the Stanford of the Sticks, the Yale of the Yahoos, the Oxford of the Oaks, otherwise known as UCO. And I have to tell you that when I started here, we were parking on dirt. We now have lovely parking space, although they're taking them out to build these buildings. We have lovely paved parking spaces that we didn't have before. Used to be able to drive all the way through campus. There are all these roads. So we have two malls now basically through campus that they closed off campus. And so there's no traffic in theory, although they seem to run those golf carts up and down the mall incessantly. But, you know, it used to be much more dangerous. We were parking. We had these Butler buildings out between the College of Hippy Dippy and the College of Business over here. We had the Butler buildings that we were using for classroom space. And there was no grass, there were no trees. UCO looked kind of like a prison complex without the barbed wire around it. And I walk around campus now, and it's actually a pretty campus. We planted lots of trees. We closed off the interior of campus so that you used to be able to park, for example, at the communication building. There was a parking lot right there between the business building and the communication building. There was a big parking lot. It was mostly dirt, but you'd park right there. There was just this big mud hole outside of Thatcher Hall. It was this hill that had nothing in it that filled in with water. And George and I said, well, you know, since there's always water there, maybe we ought to put a pond there. And they put in a pond and they built onto the UC. And it's actually, like I walk around campus and it's actually a pretty campus now. And the reason I tell you all this is because we built a lot of buildings. We had some ugly buildings. We updated some buildings. We made them prettier. We're building buildings. But what's happening in education generally, from my perspective, that I see happening, is that this course is offered online. And I teach both sections of it, this face-to-face class and the online section. And which section do you suppose has more students enrolled in it? The online section. Why is that? Why are you all here? Why did you all enroll in the online section?
Cost.
Cost?
Online.
Yeah, I haven't figured that out either. Like, it should be cheaper to deliver this online, shouldn't it? You're not taking up, you're not having to pay for the air conditioning for that student. You're not having to pay for the lights to be turned on and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yes, it's more costly, so there's an online fee. So why else is it that you're not taking this class online?
I learned better in class.
I do hear that. It's amazing. Your generation, although you've grown up with online and you do have a good knowledge of how to navigate the online cyberspace environment. For a lot of you, what I find is that students tell me that they suffer from a little bit of ADD, and it's easy to put off that online class until, oh my God, there's a test due and I forgot about it. And you just click and forget. And so a lot of you still want the traditional method because you still want that interaction. You learn better. I think you have to be, if you're gonna learn online, you have to be sort of an autodidact. You have to, now I upload these lectures so that the online students can see them, but I'm sure a lot of them don't view them because again, they'll all read the book, I'll take the test, whatever. And so you want to actually have face-to-face classes, but more and more students like the flexibility of having online. And so we are taking out classrooms in the College of Business and turning them into things like the Student Lounge because we're moving online. If we're moving online, my point of all of this is, if we are moving online, why are we building buildings? We're building buildings that nobody's going to be in 10 years because the face of education is going to change radically. Why is that? Because bureaucracies and government, we are a government agency. Technically speaking, you don't think of me as a bureaucrat, but I am a bureaucrat. I work for a state agency. As an employee, I am a street level bureaucrat. Government agencies generally do things very slowly and incrementally, and it takes them a long time because they don't go broke instantly if they are too hierarchical and too bureaucratic. Businesses in theory will go broke. Yeah.
Have you seen any correlation between grades and online classes and in class?
Generally, I teach I will tell you, so this is actually an area of research for me, and I use my marketing ethics class as a basis for research. I've done a lot of research on that. And in the marketing ethics class, the grades tend to be lower, significantly lower than my face-to-face class. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One is that ethics is really hard. It's really, really hard. And B, they don't have necessarily, you don't get the, part of ethics is understanding the debate. And so face-to-face students, when I give them essay exams, understand that you have to engage, this is the debate. Whereas online students have a tendency to write one paragraph and think that's enough. Whereas at least if you come to class, and again, they have access to my videos, which they don't watch, I'm sure. I say things like, if you're writing one paragraph, that's an F. You need to have 5 paragraphs. A C-level response here is 5 paragraphs. So I think that, yes, there is, at least in my experience, there is a definite correlation between lower grades in online classes and face-to-face classes. My face-to-face students do well. Now, I have not done that in this class yet. We'll see. I have not, because this is the first time I've taught IMC here.
I was gonna say, a lot of people who take personal finance and stuff like that online do way better. They just get A's. Or I guess it would probably be just easier courses because there's so many people that say you take it online, it's so much easier.
I think that's true.
Well, I think it's because on most of the online courses, you have to use McGraw-Hill. And McGraw-Hill is basically a joke. And as long as you do your McGraw-Hill learn smarts and stuff, you're getting A's. And that stuff you can just, it's regurgitating, you're not actually learning
it.
You just, honestly, if you have a photographic memory, I look at the sentence structure and tell the test. And I can remember the answer to that sentence structure with 2 words in it. And you don't even learn it.
Yeah.
So I took this little marketing online, and so I had to relearn all this stuff.
I think it is interesting to look at whether or not there is a difference. That would be an interesting research project if there's a difference between sort of the basic primary principles courses versus my ethics course, where students just don't do as well online. And it is statistically different. I've done the analysis to see if there is an actual difference, and there is. So all of this, going back to agencies' roles, why is it we're building buildings? Because that's historically what universities have done. And maybe what you need is you need somebody to come in from the outside and say, why are you building these buildings? You have fewer and fewer students on campus and you're building buildings for nobody to be there. And that's what an agency can do for a big organization like Ford. You think this is great, and an outside agency who does research might say, it looks like to us that the trends in the market are shifting. And in fact, they did at one point in time. 7 or 8 years ago, when gas prices were approaching $5 a gallon, even here in God-given Oklahoma, where we produce a lot of oil and gas, what was happening to truck sales across the nation?
Decreasing.
They were declining, and what was going up?
Car sales, hybrids.
Toyota Prius, their sales were through the roof. And so if you have somebody from the outside, you might say things like, you really should invest in hybrid technology. That seems to be the trend in the market today. And you don't get that bogged down. Even big businesses can become myopic in their approach because they are so entrenched, and you get constituencies within the organization itself that are committed to this or that product line when maybe they should be considering something else. So types of agencies that you can have full service agencies that are responsible for producing ads and communication, performing research for the company, selecting media. They can also offer strategic marketing planning and promotion, sales promotion, direct marketing, package design, and public relations. And they can be organized in 2 ways. They can be organized by department. That's historically the way that agencies were organized. If you think about, if you watched Mad Men, they're organized. They have the creative department, and they have the sales guys, and they have the administration department and stuff like that. Or you can be organized by group, in which you bring together a lot of people from various different parts of the agency, each focusing on a specialization with regard to dealing with the client. So you have a group system in which they go out, and that's what we did in the company that I worked for. We actually had a group system. So even though I was the vice president, executive vice president for administration, I worked with, on projects, sales, different sales vice presidents and things like that. And we would put together a team to go out for each RFP.
Did you like going out to agencies, or did you like doing it all in-house? Because I worked for an agency over the summer. I was doing sales, and I got a lot of resistance where people didn't want to do that.
The company I worked for, basically we did most of our stuff, most of our promotion in-house, and then we contracted with various. We did ad hoc buys. A lot of ours, but our market was different. We didn't really advertise traditionally because we were selling learning management systems. So it's not like something you're going to take out a television ad for, because you're selling to school districts. So you have to go out. You can reach teachers and try to influence them, but you do that largely through trade shows and through educational conferences and stuff like that. And so we did purchase ads, but we did it on an ad hoc basis. We had a director of marketing communication that would put together an ad, and then he would bring it to the executive team, and we would look at it, and then they would run it in Education Today or various trade pubs that we wanted to get in front of superintendents. But we didn't actually do like television advertising, because that's just not the market. It's like L3 integrated systems. You've probably never seen a television ad for L3, because why would you do that? So full service, they do all of those things. Then you can have boutique agencies, and this has become somewhat typical, particularly in markets, I think, like Oklahoma City. You have creative boutiques, small firms that focus on providing services such as advertising development, and they employ writers and artists, but they don't necessarily provide media coordination services or research or account planning. And then you can have media specialists. They are specialists in buying media for TV and digital advertising. So sort of lesser, more a la carte type services of of firms as opposed to that full big type of agency. And this is what you'll find a lot of smaller to mid-sized firms actually use as sort of that ad hoc approach and using boutiques to, so for example, one of the agencies that we had to go outside, we sold a lot at trade shows, and so a booth is really important. And so there are agencies that do nothing but build trade show booths. And we spent $150,000 on our trade show booth. It was incredible. It had this big A+ that went around on the top of it. It was really remarkable. It was also a gigantic pain to set up. It took almost an entire day to set up our booth at trade shows. But we would, that was something we would go out and we contract with that agency to build a booth. So agency compensation, this is where the second critical thinking challenge comes in, and we'll see what you guys come up with. I'll give you about 5 minutes or so to try and come up with the answer. Compensation traditionally has been in the form of commissions from media. Now, this has become controversial. Why? Well, what happens in commission type services? So the ad agency gets the client, they represent the client, and then they get their commission from the media itself. Typically, it's been 15%. What does it encourage them to do? What does it encourage the agency to do?
Do the best work,
Does it?
or do 50% of the best work.
Critics say it encourages them to recommend higher priced media. Like what?
TV.
If you're going to put the same amount of work into a television spot as you are into coming up with a national billboard campaign, for example, and you're making more money or the sales are bigger on TV, what are you going to recommend to your clients?
TV.
Television. Is television appropriate for every product or company? So that's the criticism, is that they're more likely to recommend high-priced media. Historically, what's been the high-priced media? Well, it's been television clients. And they can focus on their compensation to media costs, so it ties them to those media companies. And it encourages, according to critics, agencies to recommend mass media and non-commissioned, to recommend mass media over non-commissioned IMC tools such as direct mail, sales promotion, and public relations. What do the defenders say of the commission system? That was historically what we had. Now, by the way, internationally, it's changed. In the United States, the text tells you that there's been a move away from the commission system. Internationally, the commission system still seems to dominate the agency compensation structure. Defenders of the system say, well, it's easy to administer, it's easy to fix, to calculate prices, it's flexible. And that is a second type of compensation system is a fee arrangement. There's two types here. There's the fixed fee. The agency charges a fixed monthly rate for all of its services to its client. And then there's the fee commission combination, where the agency charges media commissions are collected and they're applied to the fee. And if it's less, if the commissions are less than the agreed on fee, the client pays the difference between the fee and the commission. You can also have cost plus agreements. Where did these come from, these cost plus arrangements? Where is cost plus often used in business? Where do you see cost plus? Where's the biggest, where did this come from?
Cost of shipping, like accounting.
What industry is the biggest one that uses cost plus? Construction. Why is that? Why is cost plus typical in construction?
Few days.
Maybe. Why is cost plus typical in construction? So if you're going to build a building, generally what we do is we agree to build this building, like when we built the Center for Transformative Cheating here at UCO, we agreed to pay the cost of building the building plus a certain amount. Why is that? What happens to prices in the building industry.
Oh, they fluctuate.
They fluctuate widely. Why?
Natural disasters or just whatever.
Exactly. You can have, if for example, you are shipping stuff and you have a hurricane in certain regions, that can cause the price of shipping to go up. So what's happening along the Gulf? What happens whenever we have a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico to gas prices, for example? The gas prices skyrocket. Why is that? There's two reasons. Well, one is we get a lot of oil from the Gulf of Mexico through offshore oil rigs, and those are shut down when there's a hurricane. And then what else happens? What'd you say?
The refineries are in Texas.
Yeah, the refineries are all along the Gulf Coast in Louisiana and Texas. And every time there's a hurricane in that region, what happens to the refineries?
Shut down.
They have to shut down, which means the transportation costs for things like lumber, steel, bricks, although bricks, we get a lot of our bricks around here. That's one of the reasons that we have a lot of brick structures in Oklahoma, because we have this wonderful red clay, which makes a really good brick. You don't find that so much in the Northeast, where they actually have a lot of wood structures for things, because what's more plentiful in the Northeast? Well, it's lumber. So those construction costs can fluctuate widely over the period of time of a construction project. So for example, when we built the Center for Transformative Cheating, it took something like, I think, 18 months from groundbreaking to completion of the building. And during that 18-month period, you could have a lot of natural disasters that would affect the prices. And so contractors generally do a cost plus type of arrangement with their clients. So these have become common, or have become more common also with regard to integrated marketing communications, where the client pays the cost of producing the materials plus an agreed to profit margin. There are also incentive-based structures where the agencies are compensated above their costs if they achieve or exceed results that are based on metrics that are agreed on in advance. And then you can have percentage, usually percentage compensation plans, where it's usually ranges from 17 to 20%, sort of a standard markup. So here's the next critical thinking challenge that I've given you. Add, create, and I'll see if I can read all of this on this to you. Add, create has an incentive-based agreement with Anchor Motors. Add, create gets to keep a full 15% commission from media if Anchor Motor sales for the period of advertising show an increase of 5% or greater, compared to sales in the same period of the previous year. For sales increases between 3 and 5%, Add, create gets to keep 13% of the 15% commission that it would receive. And finally, if sales are only between 1 and 3%, they only get to keep a 10% commission out of the 15% commission structure that they would get if they had above 5%. So the historic commission structure of 15%. For the second quarter this year, sales rose 5.2% over the second quarter for the previous year. Add, create paid the media company that did the ad, that supplied the space, $895,000 for Anchor Motor ads during the same period. Based on the information, which of the following are true? 1, Add, create billed Anchor Motors $1,152,941 for the second quarter of 2016. Add, create's income from Anchor Motors accounted for the second quarter was $257,941, or Add, create billed Anchor Motors $1,052,941 for the second quarter of 2016. So I'll let you get in your groups and think about that. And I will pause the live feed for a minute, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it on the other side.